I am back from a really wonderful vacation where I was on a lake camping and doing just lots of reading and reflecting and just much needed time to just sort of digest and integrate everything that's been happening in my life and in the world. So I'm just first of all wishing you some lovely time if you can even take an hour out or a weekend or a day to just really be sort of introspective and look at everything that's happening in your life and what you want to be creating. I think it's just so important that we take some time to relax and rest because I know life can just be so busy and there's so much kind of chaotic energy up in the world. Both we can witness, but also astrologically this month, there's so much kind of intensity and chaos, and really important to be sort of keeping your personal practices and making sure you take some time out to just sort of be with yourself and reflect so we don't get kind of swept away by everything that's happening in the world, the needs of people in our lives and all of that. So I'm really excited today, kind of within that theme, to talk to you about self-compassion. But let me pause for 1 minute because I want to make sure that I can be watching the comments here and anything else in case you have questions or comments that come up. So, okay, I have that on my phone now. So self-compassion. So first of all, this month, I want to be really talking to you about feminine wisdom and energy. So I put out a little poll in our Facebook group. If you're not in the group, it's the She Sings Out Loud Sisterhood. We'd love for you to join us. And I put out poll in the group just asking what you most wanted, what you needed, what support you would like from me, what you'd like me to talk about. And the majority of you responded more about mindset. So I thought we would look at mindset this month, and I've been talking a lot about mindset, but specifically I want to talk about feminine wisdom and power this month and some different themes and energies and archetypes that live within that. So let me first of all say that feminine energy and power, feminine energy is really something that exists in all genders. So it does not have anything to do with necessarily your gender identity, your biological makeup, anything like that. It really is an energy force that is in the world, and it is in union with the masculine. So ultimately, there is no separation between masculine and feminine, but we can separate these two energies as a way to embody their wisdom qualities more fully and to work with their neurotic qualities so we can just be more whole and balanced as human beings. And this said, I think it's really important for women and femme people to really investigate feminine power because our culture has really undervalued the feminine and suppressed the feminine and suppressed, and oppressed women. It's really what I've kind of seen is so much of how women have been allowed to have a voice in the world, or we've been able to kind of come into our power, has had to do with taking on more masculine ways of being. Okay. And an example of that is that we've really had to embody this kind of go-getting and doing energy in order to sort of accomplish and to be heard, and sometimes getting a little bit aggressive. And that's not necessarily bad, but if we are only that way, if we're only acknowledging the masculine, which is the kind of more linear way of doing things and is definitely an outward sort of doing energy, then we might just, find ourselves out of balance. And there's a necessity to really reclaim feminine power and go more deeply within ourselves in order to be whole. Because again, this is all about balancing these two energies in all genders. And in particular, as women and femme people, what you could investigate for yourself is, do you have a strong feminine essence? So often these qualities and energies are more dominant, either the masculine or the feminine. And again, it doesn't have to do with your gender identity or biological makeup, but you could investigate for yourself, do you have a more dominant kind of feminine energy or masculine energy? And if one of them is more dominant, is that because you've had to take that on as sort of a should in order to be valued and heard in the world? Or is that your true essence? Or are you really naturally balanced? There are some people who are just really naturally in balance with these two energies, okay? And then you want to keep kind of working on that balance. So for myself, I definitely have a really, really strong masculine side. I tend to have a lot of doing energy. I tend to kind of think strategically and work in this kind of linear way. I do lots of goal setting. I really love structure, these things that we are, for lack of better language, and also because there's a sacred element to it we're calling the masculine, right? And that said, for myself, I got really depleted and run down by sort of running my whole life from this sort of masculine way of being at the expense of honoring my feminine side. And so it's been really important in my own journey to reclaim the feminine aspects of receiving and compassion and being and intuition and creativity and spaciousness and the sense of kind of nurturing and care for others and loving kindness and just a kind of more spontaneous, creative flow way of doing things rather than just kind of the linear and structured way of doing things. So I talked about this recently when we talked about the right and left brain ways of working with your creative process and your practice. Okay, so you can check that out if you want more on this, and I'll be continuing to speak to it. And I really think that when we're talking about masculine and feminine power, it's an investigation and it's ongoing. So I'm completely open to your thoughts on it, your ideas. I've done lots of my own research and reading and introspection around this, but I'd love to know your thoughts. And I think it's this ever evolving landscape, and it's also deeply personal. So it's going to show up differently for each one of us. But this reclaiming of our feminine power is so important so that we feel in balance and we can learn to lead from the feminine. So the feminine becomes in service to the masculine, whereas in the past, maybe the masculine has kind of run the show and the feminine's only been allowed to come in certain situations. So this is about learning to lead with your intuition, with your sense of, again, spontaneity and creative flow, honoring being over doing. And I know I could go on and on. Maybe I will do a full live just on this at some point, but those are just some things to get you started to think about how can you lead more from there. Another way to say it would be how can you lead from your core, from your gut, from your intuition, rather than always your kind of linear strategic thinking mind, which is what our culture tends to emphasize. So that's just a little overview when we're talking about feminine, masculine energy. There's also, you could go into sacred archetypes. There's all kinds of sacred archetypes from different spiritual traditions that have to do with this, again, feminine quality, which again exists in all genders, but there's some really beautiful work around archetypes that maybe we'll talk about at some point. But you could even look within your own spiritual tradition, who are those archetypes or those, historical living people who were embodying these different qualities. So that's the little overview. So we're going to be talking this month, as I said, about different feminine wisdom qualities. So one feminine wisdom quality is that of compassion. And compassion is our ability, I feel, to open our heart beyond what is comfortable to a place that is often very vulnerable in order to bear witness to another. Okay, so compassion has so much to do with, similar to empathy, but I also feel that maybe slightly different from empathy. It's about the sense of bearing witness. Okay, it's not just necessarily putting ourselves in someone's shoes or feeling what their pain is. It's definitely part of that, but it has this aspect of bearing witness and really extending beyond what is comfortable. Whereas I think when we think about empathy, it's a little more of sort of this natural flow. Compassion is this invitation to stretch, to move beyond, again, what's comfortable and expand our ability to bear witness to others' suffering. Okay, so I could probably talk more about that, but just as a general overview, that's a place to start. Now, when we talk about self-compassion, let's look at that from the same kind of identifying of this language, so of what compassion means. So self-compassion, therefore, would be the act of being able to bear witness to yourself and to have space for all that you are, all that you feel that you're not, without shutting down. So often when we have a judgment about ourselves, we immediately have a reaction after the judgment. So inside of our creative process, let's say there's some sense of, I'm not good at X, or my voice sounds not great today or bad today, or this song is not working, or I'm a terrible songwriter. It could really even go to those extremes. I'm a terrible songwriter. I have no business being a musician. We can tend to get that sort of aggressive and unkind with ourselves. And compassion is this ability to step back and to actually own who we are and who we're not, again, that's within our own thinking, our own thoughts about what we're capable of and what we're not, and actually create some space around it and hold it with loving kindness and this ability to just really deeply look at it without judging it, without shutting down by judging it, and without shutting down by trying to build ourselves up. So that's the opposite of what we often do. So we tend to be in this pattern where we shut down and we react and we judge ourselves. And then as a way to kind of combat the self-judgment, we try to kind of open that up by building ourselves up. And this is really an unstable ground for any sense of confidence, because it's not rooted in any true deep belief and faith in what we have to offer. It's simply a reaction of feeling like we're not good enough. Even the building ourselves up is sort of a reaction to feeling like we're not good enough. So the self-compassion allows us to actually step back and bear witness to it all and hold it all in such a way that we're just really open. And it can feel really vulnerable and it can feel really uncomfortable when we first begin to do this, because it's very unfamiliar. It's breaking this pattern of reacting to our own self-judgment, okay, or reacting to our own thoughts in general. So that's kind of the invitation, is what does it take to actually open your heart and expand and become big enough to hold all of it, all of the thoughts you have, all of the feelings that you have, and to just rest in that, to take some deep breaths and just really stay with your experience rather than jumping to conclusions with your mind. So connecting to the heart of the experience. So it really is about this opening and this expanding and this creating more space. Okay, so it has to do with having space, as I said, for the parts of ourselves we don't like or we judge. It also has to do with having space for our learning and our process. So we're really good at being hard on ourselves, and when we feel like we're not good enough, we are really good at just spiraling into the sense of almost, I think, hopelessness. Like somehow because we're struggling with something, right? Because feeling like we're not good enough, ultimately what's underneath that is something might feel difficult. But that's not a bad thing. In fact, that's what we want, because if things were always easy, we would never grow. And we want to be continuing to develop as a musician and kind of switch our thinking from feeling depleted and self-judging around what we're not good enough to actually getting excited and working on it so that we can grow. Okay, so we tend to spiral into this hopelessness and this feeling of being stuck in this solid identity, like it's never going to change. We're never, because we're struggling right now, we're never going to be good at that thing, which is just not true. Some things just require practice and work, okay? And of course, there's other things like we're often not honoring the gifts that we do have, and we spiral into this place of real hopelessness, I think. And then we get stuck, creative paralysis steps in, all kinds of things start to spiral. So self-compassion is having space for our learning process, is being able to really say, oh, I'm struggling here. And instead of the harsh judgment, just actually like holding yourself as you would if a child was struggling. If a child was struggling, you wouldn't go, you're so terrible, why are you struggling with this, right? You would say, oh, I see that's hard for you, right? That's okay, it's hard. Well, how can we start to work on this? Or how can we make this better, right? How can we have you kind of grow in this? You wouldn't just judge the state that this child is in the moment, right? So it's having space for our learning and having compassion for who we are. And part of that self-compassion is really realizing everything we've come through and really acknowledging that. From the time we were very young, whatever our circumstances were, whether we grew up in a privileged, relatively easy situation, or we had a lot of trauma in our childhood or challenging circumstances, wherever you are on that, there's still so much that we've come through. Even if you grew up in a state of privilege, there's so much that human beings, as children, as human beings, we have to overcome with our own mind. And the fact that even if we weren't directly affected in our childhood, our world is a really challenging place. And so there's so much that we've had to come through to just get to where we are. So the self-compassion can be really acknowledging that. It's not turning it into excuse. It's not making it a story like, oh, I had a hard childhood, therefore I'm struggle in this way and I'll always struggle. It's not that. It's more just recognizing, oh, wow, look how much I've grown since X time in my life. Look how much I've come through. I can understand that I'm struggling with this based on everything that I've come through and where I am now. And just really having a sense of it being okay that you're struggling rather than judging it. Again, bringing this image of like you would with a child, just having some love and compassion for, okay, it's okay that I'm struggling with this. Dropping the expectation of needing to be perfect or show up a certain way, and just really having that sense of acknowledgement of what you've come through and space for who you are. And then from there, we can start to open. So once that little seed of self-compassion is placed by just acknowledging what we've come through and who we are and having some love and space for it, then we've opened up the doors, and now there is a possibility for growth. So before there was just the spiral of self-judgment and hopelessness. And when we open up that space for self-compassion, we can actually start to see the possibility. We can see the direction that we want to move in, and we can start to very gracefully guide ourselves into that. Okay, so that is pretty much what I want to say for today. I'll just summarize by saying that the self-compassion begins by having some space and having a kind of softening towards ourselves and having the ability to bear witness to all that we are, the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things we judge, and just simply bearing witness to it. And instead of shutting down and closing and becoming harsh, to just open up our hearts around it and begin to have some compassion for ourselves. And then from there, we can open up even more space to actually see how we could guide ourselves into a place of growth, specifically with our creativity. So my invitation to you today is to look at specifically, could be anywhere in your life, but specifically in your creative process. Where are you in danger of spiraling into this self-judgment and this hopelessness around your work? And it could be a really big thing, all-encompassing, or it could be the tiniest thing, like you're really struggling with finishing a lyric of a song and you're starting to spiral into this judgment or you're questioning everything that you write. Like that could be another way that the judgment shows up, where you just don't trust what's coming through you. You just are constantly questioning it. And can you take a deep breath? Can you take a step back and begin to invoke the sense of compassion, the sense of just bearing witness to your creative work and to acknowledging how far it's come. So if it's that little tiny line of lyric that you're messing with, can you actually step back and have appreciation for the whole song and everything it took to create that song up until this point, and then continue to open your heart and expand your heart and bear witness to it until you start to trust what is coming through you, and then you're able to grow and just create something. Just take an action from that place of compassion. Maybe it's not the perfect lyric, maybe it's not the right song, maybe it's not, maybe there's still a sense of struggle, but in this space of opening your heart and creating more space, can you then step in and take an action and just root that in the sense of faith that you have done the best that you possibly can, that you are a human being who is continuing to grow and to learn, and just press in some self-love and some compassion and some honoring of your beautiful work, because the world needs your voice. Your voice matters. And the more that you can develop the sense of self-compassion and space for all that you are, all that you want to be, and all that you have yet to become, then you are able to fully birth this voice into the world and share it. Much love to you. Have a beautiful week. I'll see you next Tuesday, same time, same place, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, on our Facebook page or inside our She Sings Out Loud Sisterhood group. Take care.